Right, so my name's Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Today, this is the second Deep Cuts podcast. I'm joined by a music journalist who writes for online publications such as PopMatters and the Best Fit. He's the author of the forthcoming book Appetite for Definition, an encyclopedia of rock music genres scheduled for publication in 2018. Ian F. King, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Oliver?
Yeah, not too bad at all. How's it your end? Is it sunny? Is it grim? What's it like?
It is going to be pretty sunny. If I'm looking out my windows, seems like it should be an actually okay day. It's been kind of cold so far this month, but yeah, spring might finally be here.
Nice. And you're doing this You're doing this at about 9 a.m., aren't you?
Yeah, it's about 10 a.m. in New York. Where are you based again?
The UK. So it's it's 3 o'clock right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereabouts in the UK?
It's a little town called Sandwich. Actually, you wouldn't believe. It's a tiny little place, and it's just I know it, isn't it? It's just underneath London, really. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a strange old place full of old people, but it's all right. I wanted to invite you onto the podcast today, Ian, to have a discussion about a number of things, really. You spend a lot of your time writing and talking about music. You've got a publication you're working on, so I thought we'd delve into that, talk about what it's like to represent your musical opinions and put that content out online, really. But first off, how did you get into writing about music?
Well, I started writing for websites about 7 years ago, music websites. I'd done some music writing before that. I started writing for a site called Line Journal, which was based in New York. And from there, I wrote for a site called Stereo Subversion. I wrote for a site called Redefine. Stereo Subversion was around until very recently. They're actually rebranding, and they're going to relaunch again sometime soon. If I'm correct on that, I hope. I started writing for PopMatters in, I want to say, 2014, and Line of Best Fit since about 2015.
Mm. So. And they're both doing. I mean, I suppose the publications, the online publications for music, have really split off, haven't they? There was a time where Pitchfork was sort of the only real big purveyor of the music discussion outside of newspapers and print media, and then we had this big split off, and there's loads. There's The Quietus, which is one I look at a lot. Obviously, PopMatters, the Line of Best Fit. Drowned in Sound's a UK one that's still going. It's been going for a while. So it's good to see that there's a lot of diversity in writing about music still in the age of the internet, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the one thing about the internet is anybody can get on and do it, and so I think when did Pitchfork start? I want to say 95 or 96. So they were definitely one of the first, and that longevity has been good to them. But it's great to see how many other sites have come up. There were a lot of papers back in the day, but I don't know how many papers back then versus how many websites there are now. But I'm willing to guess that there are many more websites than papers, and it's nice to have so many voices, for sure.
Yeah.
It means that no one critic can make or break a band, which is a good thing.
I definitely agree.
Even though some people do think Pitchfork can make or break bands, and maybe that's true, but
I think Pitchfork, they obviously do have a lot of value, don't they, in the scene, and people do take their.
Absolutely.
I mean, I did a listening party this morning actually for the new Gorillaz record, and it was definitely a mixed response, but the Pitchfork review came in at the same time that we were talking, and it was a 6.9, and straight away people, not that many people that were on the chat were going, okay, well in that case I changed my opinion, but you can tell that the discussions and the ratings they give things really do carry weight to music fans, whether you want it to or not, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they really they've really got the with that point decimal system, they've really
yeah, the percentages matter.
If it's not a 7.5 or better, then it must be horrible, right?
Oh, exactly. And it's a shame that people get so tied up with a specific rating for. And I think people forget. You see Pitchfork, and all you see is the circle and the arrows, but you forget that there's a number of writers. There's so many people that write for Pitchfork now. That's not necessarily just because one Pitchfork writer gives something a 6.9 doesn't mean the whole company also agrees with that rating. I think people forget that it's a bit more faceless. I think when people get used to people like Anthony Fantano online, the needle drop talking about music, and it's very personal. You get to know the reviewer. It's less like that with something like Pitchfork, because there's such a conglomerate of writers and opinions. That's why people get so sucked up in that rating, don't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been like that for ages. You always kind of associate. People don't say, "Oh, so and so in Melody Maker in the '90s gave me a bad review." It was, "Oh, the Melody Maker gave me a bad review," or "Oh, Sounds gave me a bad review," or which it's nice as from a writer. Maybe it takes a little less responsibility off yourself for the whole paper has to kind of stand behind you, and to that degree, I think every site does stand behind their reviewers' ratings, but it's it is one writer among many writers for a site. It's one writer among many writers for multiple sites. But I think it's music is one of those things where opinions are valid wherever they come from fans, from writers or whatever. And I think these writers are what did you say the Gorillaz got? 6.9?
Yeah, I think it's 6.9. Yeah.
See, that doesn't sound bad to me. That seems perfectly fine.
Well, you're in the upper half, aren't you? So
yeah,
it's not that bad. I mean, I don't even know what I give the album, to be honest, because I don't tend to do number ratings if I can help it. But yeah, it's the numbers game. I did a video on it fairly recently, actually. It probably had the most vitriolic reaction in the comments section to anything I've done before, because I think people really actually like ratings, because there's some way of setting a system, isn't it? And without that, all those words can get... There's so many different reviews for different artists and different bands. It's like, how do we somehow, put all these together and sort out some sort of hierarchy of what I want to listen to or what I should listen to next and all that. So, yeah, I think ratings definitely have a place, but maybe there's a little bit too much importance put on them rather than actually the interesting, insightful words that a reviewer might be talking or writing.
Yeah, well, I do remember about 10 years ago, I was talking to a Pitchfork writer, and I forget exactly what it said, but at that point in time, he said that the average view of a page view for a Pitchfork review was something like 4-point-something seconds. People were just they were just clicking on, reading the number, and then going on to the next one. And we do write these things for a reason. We actually the numbers are helpful, but only to some extent. The actual thoughts and reaction and feeling that the record gives you, it's worth reading that as well. The numbers can only take you so far, and I mean, numbers mean different things to different people. There was recently a bit of a thing on, I think it was Twitter, where the Diet Cig record got like a 5-point something, and people thought that was took that as just like they're trashing the record, but 5 is still I don't know, a lot of people now view 5 as like, oh, it must be garbage, but I don't think that. I think 5 is like fair, and like I mean unless if 5 isn't the bottom, it's the middle. So but that's just that's kind of an old school. I think back in the day, people were much more likely to hand out, like a 1 or 2 or a 3 or something, if we're going on a 10-point scale, and now there seems to be, kind of everything is falling in this, 6 to whatever range, and so if it gets below, then, it's somehow it's not good. But, like back in the day, like, Pitchfork used to hand out like 2s and 3s, and you don't really see it that much anymore. And I think, so then when somebody gets a 5, it's like, oh gosh, but it's not bad. Yeah. I don't think 5 is bad.
I'd agree. I mean, if something like you say, if something's halfway up the scale, then in theory it should have some kind of merit. There's no point in having a scale where stuff that's not particularly good goes between 6 and 7, and anything above 7's great. Anything below 5 is not worth listening to, because otherwise we may as well just have a 5-point scale or just not have a scale at all. It's funny. It's funny because talking about reviews and all that sort of thing. The first time I came across your writing was recently when I saw your review of the Idols record. That was that reminds oh, it's a great record, isn't it? I really like it. It's exciting to see a band that are sort of channeling punk in such a sort of mainline way. It's a really exciting record, and that for me, and going back to really about ratings and things like that, I really enjoyed your writing. I didn't really care. I can't even remember what you gave the record. I think it might have been an 8. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was an 8.
It was an 8, yeah. But that wasn't what I took away from the review. What I took away was the things you were talking about, which is what you would like, I'm sure, every reader to do.
I think that's what we all hope, that everyone comes to, like the actual excitement that record like that. And however you're listening to it, you could be out at a bar or something, you could be in your house, in your bedroom or something. It'll still, like, a record like that gives you such a buzz that's what you want to communicate. I don't think
exactly.
And it takes a certain amount of thoughts and words to try and get that across to people. So
yeah, you can't convey that excitement in a number, even if the number's 10, and then that wouldn't make any sense with it. So I rarely ever give anything a 10. It's funny. I mean, not that I want to bang on about Pitchfork, because it gets boring after a very short amount of time, but I think one thing with review style and writing style, that's something that's really, I've seen a split over the last few years, and I'm sure you've noticed it, but Pitchfork, ever since they've been bought out by Condé Nast, but a few years prior to that as well, their reviews are very much think pieces, not particularly traditional review writing. And for me, as someone who reads reviews all the time and reads think pieces on music and reviews, I find that type of think piece that's very, very personal and doesn't talk much about the music, it doesn't particularly do much for me. I think it works in certain settings, but it doesn't work in others. And what I like about the reviews I've read of yours is that there is an element of personalness to it, but at the same time you're talking about the music and you're discussing it, I think, in terms that people will be able to understand. I mean, is that a conscious decision in your writing style?
Actually it is. And it's really, I definitely understand where a lot of the getting personal comes from, especially when, if I'm reviewing like a reissue or something from the 80s or 90s, where it's so tied in to, like my younger years, when all this stuff is very, very personal and you don't have subjective distance. So hearing these records again as a reissue or something, it brings up all this stuff, and you want to tell people, I was doing this when I first heard the record. But I'm not a big fan of the I voice. You want it to relate to people. You want people to see themselves in the record, not you in the record, or at least that's how I approach it. And everyone is iVoice. I'm not criticizing anybody else for using iVoice. I'm not criticizing anybody else for inserting themselves into these. Like, music is personal. If your reaction is personal and you want to be personal, that's the thing. But I find when I'm reading other people's reviews, I'm less interested in the iVoice, and so I do try and keep that my narration out of it. And it's easier with newer music to especially keep out of it. But it can be difficult. You want to be like, I was doing this when I listened to the record and it made me feel this way, but you want to kind of talk to the aspects of how you think this will speak to everyone, not just you. Because it's great if you like it, but it's you should tell other people why they like it or why they should like it.
Definitely, and you're right about saying that. It's such a fine line, because I wouldn't want to read a review where it's like, the drums do this, the bass do this, the guitar does this, because that's it's very boring. You don't want to hear 10 tracks of that, do you? But then you want to bring some kind of emotion into it. But as you say, when it's overly personal, or it becomes some sort of impenetrable think piece that doesn't actually ever discuss the album, and you get to the end of the piece and you think, I'm not really sure whether this person liked this music or not, which is, let's be honest, the point of a review in the first place. I think it becomes an interesting thing. But I like what you're saying about reissues, because I think, like you say, that they come with so much baggage anyway, that I don't mind if a reviewer does something more personal with that, because we've probably read a million reviews of an important reissue anyway, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting what you say about the reviews where they say the guitar does this, the bass does this. That's another thing that's really a modern issue for music writing, is music writers no longer need to do that, because you can immediately go on, if you haven't already stolen the record online or whatever, or torrented it or whatever. It's already up and posted. You're hearing it. And a lot of times, these reviewers don't get it even that much farther in advance than it's available to the public. But by the time the review is out, you can listen to this stuff yourself. You don't need, back in the day, if you're picking up a paper at the newsstand, buying, the only way you're going to hear this record is if you go to a shop and pay 15, 20 bucks or whatever for it. Then you kind of do need somebody to tell you this is the bass and the drums and the guitar are all doing the X, Y, and Z. But you don't need to describe music in that way more. I mean, it can help to a degree, and it's certainly part of it. But to some extent, you don't have to say this song does this song does that, because the person can immediately go on and see what you're saying. So you kind of do have to find other things to talk about the record, context and things like that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's some. Well, I mean, I've been doing the channel for sort of 10 months now, and I occasionally get comments of like, why are people wasting their time watching this? Just go and listen to the music. And obviously I want them to watch my videos, don't get me wrong, but it does communicate that same idea. It's like, well, you could definitely listen to some of the things I'm saying, but you can immediately go and listen to it yourself as well. And I hope that people do that, because that makes for a more immersive experience anyway. What you can see as a weakness in music writing, you could also see as a strength, because, like you say, it brings out other ways and other forms of talking about music, without having to go, the bass line does this, but sometimes it can become a bit of an adjective attack, can't it? Because you've got to try and come up with interesting ways of saying the same thing about a certain piece of music, and it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I believe that, I don't believe that it is a waste of time to talk about this stuff. So I'm definitely in the camp that doesn't believe just go listen to the music. I think the conversation around it is important. I think the conversation around it enhances it. Without a conversation, how are we going to introduce each other to these bands that we love, or these records that we love? So. I think it's a very human thing to want to talk about anything. I mean, I mean, the internet does this for everything. It's all conversation around. Why talk about sport? Like you should just watch sport. There's nothing to. Yeah, but I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US there are like multiple channels with just people talking and guessing and speculating about sports all day long, and
it's 24/7, isn't it?
Yeah, and so it's like, well, but at the end of the day, what's the point? The point is the score at the end. But it's like, no, it's fun. It's fun to have a conversation.
You know what? I'm going to take that. Next time someone writes a comment on one of my videos going, "Why are you watching this person talk about music?" I'm going to say that. I'm going to say, well, why do you ever watch someone talk about anything? Why do you ever have a conversation? Why don't you just be like a monk who sits in silence and just experiences things? That's funny, isn't it? It's and I think it. For me, being a music fan, one of the most exciting things about being a music fan is being able to discuss music and discover it with other people, isn't it? That's one of the most enjoyable things about being a music fan, I think.
Yeah, well, and I mean, the reason I got into this in the first place is, other people doing it. When I was, 13 or 14, that's when I really started getting into music magazines and music writing, and that stuff. It had a really large impact on me, and I, just as much as I love buying the records and taking them home and listening to them, I spent hours reading, pretty much any music magazine I can get my hands on, and it all was very vital and very, significant and important to me. I mean. It's when you're that age and you're looking for stuff to latch onto, and you're looking for culture, and these are things that really give you a lot of meaning in your day-to-day experience. And maybe as you get older, for some people music just becomes like entertainment or something else. But so I would hope that, even though a lot of the kids are doing it online as opposed to the magazines that I was reading, like, I do hope that this stuff does mean something to these people, to the younger people as well.
And I think it does. I think it's proof, the fact we talked earlier about the splitting off of all these different music online publications and the popularity, and I think that shows that there is still a wide readership for it, and there's a real craving for good criticism that will introduce people to new kinds of music and help them decide what they want to spend their time listening to. And I don't think that'll ever go away. I don't honestly think that will. I certainly hope it doesn't for for mine and your sake.
Yeah, right.
So obviously the two main publications that you're doing writing for with reviews and stuff is PopMatters and the line of Best Fit. Do you find that you end up changing your review style and adapting it for different publications, or is it very much the same kind of writing style for both?
I suppose when I write for Best Fit, I try and keep in mind that, I mean, both, they have audiences on both sides, but, one's a US site, one's a UK site. So honestly, little things like if I'm using like slang or trying not to over-explain things that, some things might require a bit of explanation for a US audience with a UK band, but, if I'm writing about a UK band for UK, obviously these are things I don't need to explain. They probably, these things. So trying to keep that in mind. But aside from that, not really so much. I think the fan experience is pretty much the same on each side. And I think, at least with a lot of the music that I end up talking about, I think that it doesn't need to be talked about in any different way from one side or the other. I think the reasons that Idols would have, just to go back to that example, would appeal to UK fans is pretty much the same reason as they would appeal to US fans. I don't think they need a different context or background. Well, maybe in the US you might need to give a bit more background that people in the UK might already understand, but aside from that, no, not so much.
I think the word Brexit is pretty global at this point, isn't it? I think everyone understood some of the points they were making on that record.
Yeah. We know a bit about the Brexit over here, so
the Brexit, the dreaded Brexit.
At least the word, we know the word, if not, the deeper implications of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Brexit, you've got Trump. I mean, It
is what it is. We're both going through this together.
Exactly. We are, exactly. So what I really want to do next, Ian, is delve into the book you're writing, because honestly, for me, one of my favourite ways of exploring the phenomenon of music, aside from, actually listening to music, is through writers. Reading books and around the subject can be a really good way of understanding music more, aside from, just listening to the music or just reading reviews. Your book is called Appetite for Definition, an Encyclopaedia of Rock Music Genres. So tell us about that.
Well, the idea came to me about, I want to say 2 or so years ago. I was looking around for things to write. I'd had some other book ideas I'd been kicking around for a while that hadn't panned out. And, there's a lot left to write about music, but a lot has been written about music. And just through looking up, I realized that nobody had ever written a book that organized the history of music specifically through the lens of rock genres, and I was pretty surprised, but not entirely surprised by that.
Yeah, that's amazing, really, isn't it? You think there's it's categorization, such a thing we want as music fans. You think someone would have taken the time to talk about that in book form?
Yeah, well, there are plenty of encyclopedias out there, rock music and pop music encyclopedias of different kinds. There's like the Rolling Stone guides, there's, any number of them. And so I assumed within that whole subcategory of books that this would have already existed, but it hadn't. And so I thought, well, and I understand why not. It's a kind of, it can be a contentious issue. Rock genres are, not everyone's favorite thing. In terms of like, a lot of people don't like to categorize rock music, and but then a lot of people do, and whether or not, that's kind of, it happens. It happens one way or the other, and so, and aside from just realizing that nobody had done the book, genres to me have always been really interesting. And I think especially, and going back to talking about being a younger music fan, these kinds of categories do mean a lot to people, and they meant a lot to me back when I was a kid. Like going through. They could be like a phase, or they could be genres that stay with you. But you're like, oh, I'm this fan now, or oh, I'm that fan. I'm a fan of this now. It really can, as a music fan, genre can really become a part of your identity. Just look at punk music. This is like an entire culture. and punk goes beyond music as well, but the music is a part of it's a part of it, and it becomes this whole lifestyle thing, and to a lesser extent, people still do align themselves with genres and things like that, and so but especially having gone through multiple phases where I was into Britpop, and then I was into emo, and then I was into post rock, and these, and then you come to find out later that the artists who made music that gets categorized these genres, they may not be the biggest fans of these terms, but in talking to them, from a fan perspective, I'm like, well, I actually, my personal experience with it was that I actually liked these terms. I actually liked these categorizations. I liked identifying as a post-rock fan. I was really, I felt that other kinds of rock music around that time maybe were, or just the pop music landscape in the late 90s, early aughts in general was maybe not speaking to me as much personally. But there was post-rock, post-rock, like bands like Mogwai, Explosions in the Sky, like that, and they really were speaking to me, and I thought that they were really doing something important and revolutionary, and it didn't have to be called post-rock, whatever you wanted to call what they were doing, that's what was important to me. You could have called it whatever, but it was, for whatever reason, through the course of conversation, whoever you want to credit with for inventing the term, all these term inventions are kind of messy affairs when you try and trace the actual root of the word. I think post-rock gets traced back to Simon Reynolds, as do other genres. But then also, but even he's sort of like, maybe it came from before that. Whatever you want to call it, this music was important, and so I have nothing but positive connotations with the term post-rock. That is not necessarily the case with the bands. a lot of them just don't like it at all. And that's totally fair. But I wanted to talk about these things because there are people out there who do enjoy these distinctions, and then there are people who aren't. But it's not about assigning things as much as about the conversation around it. That's what I find the most interesting is kind of that what we talk about when we talk about blank, not necessarily what is blank, even though that's to some extent that's what the book is going to do too. When we talk about what are we talking about, well, post-rock is blah 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 blah, but here's everything else around it.
I think, and that I've come across, I'm sure you have as well, lots of different music fans that will take it different ways, where some people will use it to increase the conversation. So if someone says, what kind of rock music do you like, and you say post-rock, well, you can start talking about Tortoise and Slint and bands like that, and they'll understand what sort of music you're talking about. Whereas if you just say rock, that's pretty wide, isn't it? You could be talking about any kind of music from the 60s onwards. But then there's the other type of fan that are militaristically categorizing things, which I find really funny. Sometimes you can get in proper arguments with people because they'll disagree with the label that you've given a certain type of music. And I think sometimes people don't use the labels as a conversation. They just use it as a right. We'll put that in that box, or put that in that box, and that's it. Let's move on. And they're the type of people that I end up having arguments with about different genre labels and things like that. But as you say, they're such an important thing to our conversation, and a way of just creating a bit more of an interesting conversation, because you can start to understand where a band, maybe they sound like post-rock but they have jazz influence and these other things, and if you can't talk about genres in some sort of vague term, then how are you supposed to discuss them at all?
Right. Well, I mean, I think pretty much you go onto any music site that has like a site like Stereo Gum in the U.S. or something, for instance. Yeah. And then there are so many posts throughout the day, and they're talking about so many different kinds of artists and music that every single one of them kind of starts blank band so and so, and they find within that little 3-word phrase, they find creative ways to say it, but there's always some kind of genre like affiliation there, like you almost kind of, you're like obligated to sort of address a little bit about like the genre, whether like art punksters this or that, like it could be whatever, it could be off the top of your head, but that's it's still in there, like it still is in the day to day, even if you want to say it's all rock and roll, which is a perfectly reasonable stance. It's perfectly reasonable to say it's all rock and roll. It is a little hard, if you want to talk about it's rock and roll. Like folk rock and heavy metal. Well, it's all rock. These are both, Ryan Adams and Mayhem. Well, they're both rock and roll. What are you gonna do? Well, that's when it becomes a little less helpful to just say it's all rock and roll. Like you wanna have a conversation about it. What's it like? It's it is more complicated than that, and so that's where they become useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, how deep are you going with your genres in the book? Are you going to some of those really tiny niche genres? I can't really think of any off the top of my head, because a lot of the genres you end up talking about now end up being hybrids, don't they? Because you've got bands that sound like a post-rock band, but they also sound like they've also got elements of math rock in them, or you've got math core. So do you be delving into some of those smaller genres as well?
Yes, absolutely. That's kind of the fun of it, is to get into like the real deep, and their genres in the book can be. I'm being pretty open with the whole thing. It can be. There's only so many legitimate, widely recognized, completely, and then, you get these, you basically get there are basically three kinds of genres, and the book will include them all. Like, essentially, there are ones that are actually, very legitimate, steeped in history, are completely, legitimately definable and argue. Then there are the ones that are kind of purely media invention. Like especially the 80s and 90s, and especially in the UK, but also in the US, that was like this golden era for journalists to just invent music genres just to sell papers.
Shoegaze, anyone?
Well, shoegaze is a really funny example, because it started like that, but it is such a, if there's any one like redemption story for rock genres, that the shoegaze story is kind of amazing. It was the term itself, not beloved by the bands. Pretty much, a mean, somewhat, a little bit mean, kind of a pejorative term. The music kind of unjustly lived, and then not died, but it rose and fell at the behest of music writing at the day. But then it had this really, really long afterlife where it took a while, but then it finally made its way over to the U.S. There are early bands like Lilies and some others that were coming out like kind of right around the early 90s, when it was starting to lose steam in the UK, and then it really took off from there. There were scenes all over the U.S. in the late 90s and early aughts where little indie shoegazing scene, like where I'm from in Seattle in the Northwest, there's bands like the High Violets and Voyager 1. There were scenes in New York. There are scenes everywhere in the U.S. And people continued to find these records and dig them. The UK bands especially, and these things. They all, it stayed alive, and now we're at a point. I'm going to go see Slowdive in a couple weeks here at a venue that. At a venue that holds 1,800 people. I saw Ride 2 years ago play Terminal 5 here. That holds like 3,000 people. Ride are coming back as well. I saw Lush last year. It's amazing what's how it's come back, and shoegazing now, people have nothing but positive connotations with the term shoegazing. Like people love it, fans, including myself. So it's such a great redemption story for a genre that was supposed to be left dead on the side of the road or whatever back in 90. Back in 95 or whenever. Yeah,
like you say, it was supposed to be a pejorative term, and yet in those two words, shoegaze, it perfectly captures the sound of that swirling atmosphere that those bands were going for. And now it gets used so much. There's bands that would be called, I guess, Nugaze, Nugaze, which is a term I've seen a lot online in the last few years. And bands like Pink Shiny Ultra Blast and Have a Nice Life, and they're the sort of bands that are definitely utilising some of that shoegaze sound, and I don't think you could explain that sort of sound in any other way. So it's nice how abstract it is. It doesn't have to be based on like post-rock, is based on the word rock, and you could probably argue to the hilt whether that title really fits the sound of post-rock artists in inverted commas. But I do think, I think that, like you say, the term shoegaze is just such a great term, and as you say, it's a great example of journalism and sort of response from fans, really bringing a genre through and getting it to breathe life again. And like you say, it's really like people love shoegaze now. I speak to people all the time, and there's the guy that I speak to on Twitter quite a lot who follows the channel, and he was on the listening party this morning, and he pretty much says he only listens to shoegaze. He's like the only kind of music that he ever listens to. So it's great, and like I'm seeing Slowdive in a few weeks as well, and it's
nice.
It's really nice to see these bands get the love they deserve.
Absolutely.
And actually going back a bit to what you were saying about artists not liking different genre labels. I think that's quite a common thing, isn't it? I remember when I was doing a lot of research into Don Cab, and they hate the math rock label. But I mean, I don't know how else you could describe their music really. You could say experimental, but that's so vague. How does that help us define it in any kind of way?
Right. Well, I mean, any kind of tag like experimental or art this or art that or avant this or avant that. If you don't get more specific, then it's open. Then what is anything is experimental. Like all music is art. People. Don Cab. I've heard that. That guy doesn't like the term at all.
No, he's not a fan.
No, not a fan. Well, and that's the thing. In my whatever you want to say, research experience, there seems to be only a few genres where both artists and fans really embrace the term. Punk, obviously, heavy metal, rockabilly, and after that, you don't. There are varying degrees of acceptance. For some reason, heavy metal fans love it. They embrace the term. It's totally part of their identity. The artists themselves love being heavy metal bands. It's a whole culture, and and same thing with punk and rockabilly as well. Although rockabilly is kind of a term where it was applied after the fact. They didn't back in the 50s. It wasn't called rockabilly specifically, but it's something that has such a long, like heavy metal and like punk at this point has such a long tradition. That the band, the artists identified with rockabilly. They really like the connection. It is part of their thing. But but then I guess it would be the more experimental genres like post rock, math rock. That's people not a huge fan of the term math rock. Although, speaking of micro genres, there was a band from the Northwest in the late 90s called Botch that were kind of a hardcore metal, whatever you want to call it. The guys in the band actually, forgetting who exactly named it, but they called themselves Evil Math Rock. Speaking of micro genres, that's one band was Evil Math Rock, and that was Botch, which has always long been one of my favorite micro genres.
Excellent. I'll have to check. Not one I've come across, so I'm gonna have to check it out. I definitely fancy spending my Friday afternoon listening to some evil math rock. I wouldn't be averse to that at all.
Botch were phenomenal. They were a phenomenal band.
Well, I'll go one further with you then. So, micro genres, going outside of rock music now. What about internet-generated genres? I'm talking vaporwave, witch house. What are your thoughts on some of those? Because I get asked all the time what my opinions are on them, and I flip-flop around, to be honest. So I'd love to hear what you think about them.
Yeah, those are part of it too. That's kind of the third tier of genres. There's the historically rooted ones, the completely journalistic inventions, and then these kind of you'll get them more now. They're kind of like just like the outcomes of long conversation, through passed down through, we come to these terms conversationally with each other, and then sort of like over time they become this thing. And the internet has definitely sped up that process to where these things don't take years to come around through casual conversation anymore. The casual conversations happen very quickly, and therefore, one day vaporwave turns up, and you're like, well, wow, that wasn't here yesterday. What's vaporwave? But those are completely. I think those definitely have a place too. I mean, a lot of those are they're kind of, on the internet, they're half journalistic, half fan inventions. Journalists might toss out a term, but it takes the readers and the fans to actually run with it. They're not always successful. But if fans run with it and it becomes an actual thing, then you can't really, public opinion, public decision, and then it's then it's a genre, then you have to kind of acknowledge, well, whatever vaporwave is, people are talking about it. Can it be defined? Is it something legit? But I'm okay with it. One of my favorites in those is a Night Bus. I'm not sure if it might just be this guy CFCF from Canada. But it's just music that sounds good when you're riding the bus at night. That's what it is.
That's great.
And I think that's it. Might be just him. There might be other Night Bus artists out there. I'm not entirely sure.
That is something I'm definitely going to try and explore. That's fantastic. Let's try and get that going. Let's see if we can push Night Bus as a genre. Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's interesting as well. Like you say, like that's not based. That idea of a micro genre is not based specifically on the sound of the music, other than an atmosphere. Whereas things that spit like micro genres like sea punk and again witch house, there's an aesthetic to it. And it's more aesthetic. It's less to do with the music, because you could easily define the music of sea punk and witch house and vaporwave in a way, actually, to other genres of music. But it defines this kind of weird aesthetic around the music as well, and that's what I find so fascinating about it, actually.
Yeah, and you're getting that a lot with like electronic music genres these days, especially. One thing I have noticed is that genres within rock music specifically are kind of actually slowing down a little bit, which is another reason why I thought it might be a good time to kind of pause and take stock of the past 60 years of rock genres, because I'm sure other things have been tossed out there, but I want to say like Chillwave was kind of like the last rock, the last of the new rock genres that really kind of took hold. And it was kind of a rock, kind of electronic hybrid. People kind of used it to refer to both kinds of artists, but there were still some rock bands that it got applied to, at least early on. Like, I don't think they've been referred to it recently, but that band, like Real Estate, they were, the word chillwave was associated with them back in the day just because they're chilled out. Their music's chilled out, and so they're therefore chillwave. And that was around like 2010. I want to say it was probably like peak chillwave year, maybe 2009 actually. Maybe it had already crested by 2010, but there aren't really so many of these now. Whereas like electronic genres and hip hop genres, those have really expensially blew up. That's kind of where the action seems to be now in terms of naming and coming up with new genres. That's very much a work in progress there.
Yeah, it's exciting to see what's going to happen with some of these ideas over the next 10 years. I mean, we'd say with hip hop, it's getting so much more experimental, but that experimentalism is becoming a lot more popular. Because if you look at back in sort of early 2010, artists like Shabazz Palaces were doing the experimental hip hop thing and taking it to quite aggressive places or new places. But then you've obviously got Death Grips, who have taken that and they've become like the internet darlings, really, haven't they? I mean, I'd never have thought sort of 10, 15 years ago that a band like Death Grips would have such a following as they do. And how would you go on? Try and give Death Grips a generic marker. Go on, do it.
I'm not gonna try that one. Yeah. Whereas like they're I think the thing in rock now is, and you were talking about like hybrid stuff. I think that's really what's going on now. Rock bands they're kind of taking like multiple kind of like pre-existing genres or pre-existing styles, and kind of melding them together into very interesting and new reconfigurations. But it's kind of, you can kind of identify it, like you can identify that this is like they're taking prog rock and they're taking folk music and they're combining those two and making prog folk. That's just, I'm making that up. I don't have a specific example for that, but that seems to be what's going on. I'm not really sure why. I have theories, but no actual concrete evidence. But yeah, so it's not as
well. I wonder if I know it sounds cynical, and I'm sort of playing devil's advocate, but the point we're at, is it only possible for us to take ideas from different genres, and is that possible for us to create an entirely new genre of music that doesn't base itself in some other genre that we've already discovered, without it being some kind of abrasive alien music that we've never sort of heard before? Because even if something came along that was like really aggressive and really unusual, I think people would probably call it experimental. I don't know how many more original genre labels we're going to get in the future. I don't know. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything comes from something. No genre of music dropped out of the sky. Everything has a root, and rock and roll has its roots in blues and gospel and boogie woogie and five other. Everything's got a number of different roots, and but in terms of something that just back in the day when like you take a genre like shoegaze, it within the rock milieu, it had its precursor, but it sounded kind of like something that needed its own name. And I'm not, aside from hybrid, putting two different existing genres together, I personally haven't heard a kind of rock music recently that's really done that and been like, wow, this is so new. It needs its own identity apart from everyone else, and that's not at all a criticism. And I'm not a fan of the "Is Rock Dead" conversation so much. I kind of think that's kind of like,
that's a once a year think piece, isn't it?
It's a once a year.
You get that.
Is Rock Dead this year? Oh, okay. No. All right. Well,
no.
try again next year. Maybe it'll be dead then. It's like we're checking.
Same bullshit think piece.
Yeah, we're checking in to see if rock and roll is alive once a year. It's not. I don't know. I don't give too much credence to that. I've seen way too many younger bands playing rock music of one kind or another to think that it's going out of style anytime soon. Whether or not it's the most popular form of music in the U.S. or UK, I don't know if it has been in 20 some years. That doesn't mean that it's doesn't mean that it's not alive just because it's not the biggest selling. I mean, aside from U2, obviously, but or what, whoever else, the preeminent rock bands,
when they're not throwing their albums out for people who don't want them,
Right,
or collaborating with Kendrick Lamar as well, who knows what they're going to do next.
I think I found that album on my phone the other day, and I was like, why do I have this? I'm like, oh right, they put it on everyone's phone like 5 years ago or whenever that was, 2 years ago.
Yeah. There was like a hack going around, wasn't there, when it first came out, to try and get it off your phone, because that was how badly people didn't want free music. It must have been awful as an artist to be like, look, how much they hate us. They don't even want our free music. They want to delete it off their phones,
Well, I think it really shows the value of music and how people people expect so much music for free or to not pay for it that you could get a free album on your phone, be like, not interested, get this thing off. You're not even curious. You're like,
I'm not even going to listen to this because I don't want it.
If somebody sent me like a vinyl record in the mail and were like, here, listen to this for free, I would be curious enough to listen to it. But people get it on their phone and they're like, no, I just want it off. It's a nuisance. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. So in terms of your book, Ian, when are people able to read it? Is there a date for it? Or is it a bit vague at the moment?
Yeah, right now it's currently scheduled to come out in the fall of 2018. HarperCollins is the U.S. publisher for it. I don't know exactly which month, but it'll be fall of 2018, and there currently is not a UK publisher. But it's still early days, and I would very much like it to come out in the UK. So hopefully we'll get that lined up at some point. But it's still in the writing process, and I'm still cranking it out. So it's not done yet.
No, well, good luck with it, and I hope you do get a UK publishing. If not, I'll be importing it because I'm very excited to read about all these genres and be able to up my knowledge on it, I think. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Really enjoyed chatting with you, and yeah, good luck with your writing.
That was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. See you soon.